So it's 11:02. I think it's a good moment to open this conversation
Right.
and introduce everyone to Jedi Master Lex Liang. And I'm always excited about the people we are interviewing, but I am particularly excited today about the conversation with Lex. So I met Lex, perhaps 2 or 2.5 years ago, and I just been captivated by Lex's mind. He is someone so knowledgeable about everything. Lex has a good opinion about everything, and he cares deeply about theater. The first time we worked together was with One Night in Miami, a beautiful production that the great Carl Caulfield directed, and it was just spectacular. I think that might be the best thing we've produced at Miami New Drama. And then we collaborated on Confessions of a Cocaine Cowboy. That was not an easy project. I think at the end it all came together as beautifully as it does in theater, but because it was a world premiere, the text came in very late to the game, and we had a lot of big personalities in the project, and I froze. I have to say that this was for me maybe the hardest play I've directed, and Lex really was the one who slapped me 7 times and said, you can do it. Stand up. Let's continue. And so and that's what I did. And it was really, wonderful to have someone like Lex in the room. And we're going to
And I
talk
think
about.
if I may, Michelle, something like that, is not all. I think it's really important for people to know that not all experiences are, dolphins and unicorns, and particularly world premieres, particularly when you are trying to make things happen within a certain budget, when there are big personalities, and as an artistic director, I think it's really important for people to understand that when you're in a top administrative position like that, your job is to sort of keep everybody even keel and happy. As a director, it's really difficult to maintain that and get what you want, right? And so, but I think it's a really great litmus test for, not everything is going to be perfect. It's going to be a great result because that's what we do. But I think it's good for people to know that sometimes it's not all perfect behind the scenes, and it's great that, working professionals are able to sort of disassociate, like none of it's personal, like this is work and it's the job, and you don't agree with me, and that's okay, but we're going to move forward. And I think it was just a great experience to be having, looking back on it.
Looking back on it,
you grow from them, and it was important,
yeah.
When we did have those conversations, for me to say, Michelle, you're in charge, don't forget that. And it's hard, I get it, when you're juggling two very different positions.
And it's complicated, yes. And I think that I normally don't want to direct a lot at the theater company, because I think that the artistic director has a lot of other responsibilities to take care for, and you go into conflict of interest when you're also directing. And so I try to keep that to maybe once a season. And up to that point, I had never tested both positions at the same time during a crisis. So it was great that during a crisis I had Lex Liang by my side.
And during this crisis, we're together again.
Right, that's right. And so today's conversation, I really want to pick. I'm so delighted to pick Lex Liang's brain. He's just a genius anywhere you look at it. And I want to know about his process, and I want to know about how he approaches, a classic, a world premiere. What's his mechanism to come up with his ideas. How did he train? And then, we're definitely going to go and see examples of his work, and that's also very exciting to see, how something comes from the pencil to the stage. And by the way, his drawings are wonderful. If you check my
You
personal
mean
page,
like this little thing I did for you today? Um, Part of the artistic director series today was honoring Michelle, timed perfectly with this conversation, I might add. But I mean, look at your gala outfit there. We got to get you
It's
into that.
unbelievable. Yes. Oh my God, I went crazy. And then my wife saw it and said like, "That's amazing! I can't believe it."
We
He
need
needs
that
to make one.
wardrobe.
Yeah, yeah. And then you need to make one in shorts for the COVID era,
Yeah,
like
right,
the COVID
right.
artistic director, which no,
And the
but you
masks.
and the masks, yes. No, but this is so. I mean, I shared it with everyone. I was so happy with what you decided. But anyways, back to focus. Lex, theater. How did it happen? How did you gravitate towards theater?
I didn't. I often say that I'm probably one of the worst traditionally or classically theater people out there. I didn't grow up with any sort of theater training. A lot of people, a lot of
Where did you grow up? Where did you grow up?
Southern California.
Southern.
So, very sort of beach and sports oriented Orange County. And there weren't, when I was in school, by the time I got to sort of middle school, high school, we were really feeling the effects from the Reagan era budget cuts. So for instance, in the 70s and 80s, the high school that I went to, they had like drama classes and painting and sculpture and all these arts programs that were available. And you'd see these pictures in the hallway and be like, well, we have one studio art class that like everybody takes, freshmen to seniors to fulfill that art credit. And it wasn't until years later that I realized like what a cultural educational deficit we had because of those budget cuts, and of course the football teams are still able to go to this competition and that and all of this stuff, but every single time like the arts, languages got cut. So my exposure to theater was really sort of something that I discovered on my own. I had a really great uncle who sort of saw that I had an interest in theater, and at that time it was coffee table books from Rizzoli's and Barnes and Nobles and all of that, and so he started getting us tickets, my family tickets, whenever a show was in town in LA and a sit-down production. So I started doing that, I think, in middle school. And quickly I was hooked. I mean, and I was hooked from the not necessarily the formal drama of it, because I had no background in that, right? But I was fascinated by production and the storytelling, and that somehow these artificial worlds were put on stage with people in artificial, or real clothing, but they're presenting these characters, and it exists within our reality for a brief 2 hours and 30 minutes or something. And somebody gets paid to do that. And so I was kind of obsessed immediately from there. And again, we didn't have any arts programs, for theater arts or dramatic arts in my high school. So I was seeking out anywhere I could volunteer, community theaters, any sort of like unpaid assistant internships that I could, put shoe rubber on shoes and productions, and anything that I could do. My first professional production, I think it was 15. I designed a production of Gypsy for this local community theater. And looking back, I could probably say it was charming at best. But that sort of energy and again the research, I think, and the dramaturgy is really what I was interested in, and then also again the production, how it gets from an idea that goes from the director, that gets distilled through a designer and actors, and then ultimately gets put on stage and is experienced by an audience. I just found that really thrilling. And so in high school, I was part of student council, and I created this position, which was the sort of director of assembly productions. And these are high school assemblies in the gym, and it was like a homecoming
Yeah.
assembly. And I would say, oh, this has to be bigger than the last one. And so there would be special effects and lighting and costumes, and it was sort of my theatrical outlet. And surprisingly, there were a lot of people when I started doing that sort of jumped onto that ship and said, I want to volunteer, I want to help, I want to make these props, I want to set up the lighting, I want to sew this curtain, whatever. Because I think they were really desperate for that creative outlet because we just didn't have one in high school. And so, I cobbled together a portfolio, ended up coming to New York right after high school, going to NYU for production design. And that's what I ultimately got my degree in was scenic and costume design for theater. Graduate school was always a big question mark. Right after college, I immediately started working at a very small regional theater in Maine and ended up being their resident designer for 5 seasons. And that was really sort of my grad school. I sort of learned by doing. And, at the time, again, looking back, right, hindsight always being 2020, what a fantastic experience to be working, because now as a scenic designer, I'm doing the research, I'm doing the rendering, and I'm doing the drafting. And then, usually there's an assistant who's working with me to develop the drawings, the model, and stuff like that. And so you ultimately sort of create this small little team or this family that works together. And, I've worked with the same people for a very long time now. But back then, it was you were doing everything yourself, including, jumping in when you had to build some scenery or like working on props or, painting the scenery. And you were there till midnight, finishing the paint so that we could tech it in the morning. And, while I don't necessarily think that that's always best practices, I think it was a fantastic learning experience for me, especially as somebody who is so interested in all facets of production. And I think you really do, to be a successful blank designer, you really have to have an understanding, I think, of all of the other disciplines to some degree. You shouldn't, be a master in them, but I think you need to understand them enough to respect their position on the team, to understand how you can help each other and collaborate with each other. And so that was a fantastic 5 years. And then after that, things started rolling regionally off Broadway, and here we are 15 years later.
It's very interesting what you say you want to have a knowledge of all other disciplines. And that is actually something that comes across very clearly every time we have a conversation, because first of all, you're really an intellectual. You are somebody, working with a lot of designers.
I'm a total nerd.
Yeah, you are. But and I love, because I think for me, that's an easier way in as well, to try to, think before doing it. And you really think everything out, and then you let your impulses go in, but you always lead with the brain. And I think that just makes everything so solid, because you first create an intellectual shield, and then you put the passion in, but there's nothing gets lost, because you first understand the world in which you want to design, and asks you every time we speak. I know that you've already asked yourself 1,000 questions, and so I don't know. I just find it very different than working with a lot of other designers.
I love. I always say that I tend to be very sort of split brain, right? Like there is definitely that need for boundless creativity and passion and throwing things against the wall and seeing if they stick. Right. And just riffing, having a creative conversation without any boundaries.
Right.
And that's sort of good for the heart. It's good for the soul. It's good for that creative sort of need. But at the same time, like there was a time where I really desperately wanted to study law. And so, in business. And so on the flip side of that is, how do you approach these things realistically? Like, how do you distill that creative passion, and what has stuck to the wall, and what are the sort of milestones that you have to meet to actually get there, or who do you need to be talking to collaborate on this aspect of something? And you're right, I do. I tend to really lean into the dramaturgy and sort of the intellectual and the logistical aspects of things. I think a lot of the reason why is because, I first fell in love with that storytelling, and sort of what the tools required for that was, and sort of backstory for characters and how that influences, what they're wearing. And then, conversely, how the aesthetic choices I make, how that can sort of push the drama forward. So how those things work in tandem. So it's always a little bit of a tug of war between sort of the boundless, passionate creativity, and then sort of the regimented, logical, methodical storytelling and dramaturgy.
It makes all the sense in the world, and it works for you, and it works for the production. I mean, it just, there is a guarantee of cohesiveness if Lex Liang is working on the production.
Well, but I mean, I will, a caveat to that is, my favorite part of the production is the collaborative process. Again, because I geek out over everybody else's disciplines
You're
too.
a great collaborator, yes.
And so, and sometimes you don't get, really sort of passionately collaborative people, and sometimes you get people who are more siloed and don't want to work together, or aren't used to working sort of in that fashion. I think one of the beautiful things, actually, taking it back to Cocaine Cowboys, was we had the opportunity to work with some wonderful collaborators. I mean, the Swaders, Alan, everybody was, and is a seasoned collaborator. And I think, whatever the situation might have been, we were able to talk as creative individuals and as a collaborative team, and approach any issue sort of together. And I think that ultimately, those are the best kinds of projects, is when you can fearlessly sort of talk to and trust your fellow collaborators, that, and they know that you've got their back, and they've got yours, and you can talk about everything from, and without any sort of, defensive or ego, right? I mean, it's one of the things I love most about the Swaders, is you can have this beautiful conversation with them, that you can geek out a little bit, or you can talk about their ideas and make suggestions, and they're open to it, and they'll make a suggestion, and you're like, I never thought about that, like the red chair for Griselda, and the red jacket, and just sort of like making all those little connections, just makes for a more cohesive stage picture.
Yeah, the Swaders are, and we had them here. We had a conversation with them. They really are, this sort of like exotic animal of two brains,
a two-headed beast.
I mean, it's just, and it's such a. They've done like 5 shows for Miami Drama. And by the way, every time I think I have to like send a check of royalties to Carl Caulfield, because like I stole his team.
A finder's fee.
Yeah, absolutely. And but people don't understand sometimes, especially in communities where there's not a lot of budget to do theater. And so the first thing that get lost is, the costume, the set design, everything is very, actor focused, which, that's a problem. But the moment where you allow design to be part of the storytelling,
mm-hmm.
it elevates theater into a, into really the art form that it can be, where every element is there telling a story. They're not being just utilitarian, right? Not just, but they're really there to create a cohesive world, to create, and there's something happens to the brain of the spectator that you just, inhabit, is what you were saying, you inhabit this world for a
This
couple of
make-believe
hours,
world, yeah.
and and then it lives with you, right?
Yeah, and good production, allows you to just be immersed in it, and you believe everything, and allows you to cling on every word that the actor's saying, every word that the writer wrote. You understand, if the design is cohesive, you understand the concept of the director, and you really allow yourself to sort of immerse in the world. And I always say, to people asking about design, like, oh, you're a costume designer, it's like fashion, or you're a scenic designer, it's like architecture. And while there are similarities, I think that, the skill and the craft, there are similarities. I think the difference really is, and I think that people will probably complain that I say this, but, there's a utilitarian need, and I'm not talking about sort of the great sort of dreamer architects, but, in terms of like building design, there's utilitarian needs, and we have that in scenery too. In fashion design, you're designing clothes that tell an individual story, whereas in costume design, you're creating characters. You're allowing the characters to tell their story and create a believable world for those characters. But in both elements, I think, lighting design, sound design too, for theater, there must be an element of poetry to the design. I feel like good design is poetic. The Swaders do this really beautifully, is, they capture an essence of that story, and you see it, you feel it throughout the production, all night on that stage. Whether it's in Cocaine Cowboys, there are these sort of larger than life, grandiose operatic gestures, or One Night in Miami, where you have this replication of a hotel room,
Right.
but it's seen through a poetic lens, where it's like it's almost dreamlike in the way that they break
It's
planes and
both
everything.
outside and inside at the same time, and the
Right.
fact that they achieve that seamlessly,
Yeah.
because everything flows, but in reality you're seeing the inside and the outside, and there's all these different levels of playing that are together, but at the same time they are completely different worlds. It's unbelievable that he
And
achieved that. They achieved.
and I think it's really important, that the designers collaborate, they talk to each other about what their common focus is going to be, and
Right.
how they're going to achieve that concept. And from a costume design standpoint, sometimes it's obviously you want to get period accuracy, you want to do the research and make sure that the details are correct, particularly in a piece of historical theater that is sort of based in reality, based in something that actually happened, whether you're talking about Mountaintop or One Night in Miami. There are details that you need to sort of get correct. But then, you need to start leaning into the characters and the personalities and the colors of that, what that actor wants to sort of present. And we have a very little window of time to give the audience as much information as possible about that individual character, especially if they don't get a costume change, right? If they're in the same
Right.
thing all night.
Exactly.
And so you've got to, be somewhat historically accurate, have it be
Character. Character specific. Right.
appropriate to the character, have it be attractive enough to an audience that they engage. I think that even the most, distressed costume can have a bit of style to it. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean fashion forward, but I think that it needs to be attractive in a way, which doesn't mean pretty, right?
Right.
And so you put all these things together in a shaker, and you give it a good shake, and you put a little dash of poetry in there, and you sort of hope for the best. And then once you get the clothes on stage, you want to make sure that I always talk to actors in a fitting. Does this feel right? Does this look like what you imagine the character to be? If not, tell me why. I think it's really important to have that conversation with the actors, and the director, obviously. And then sometimes things work and sometimes things don't, and you continue to adjust.
You know, I always find it so fascinating that, you know, when you're working with actors, and sometimes they really don't, it's hard for them to get into the characters. But the moment that they put sort of like the boots, the moment
Yeah,
they put on the costume, that's like, you know, especially when the costume is correct, when the costume
yeah, yeah,
helps
yeah.
tell the story, then they find it. They put the costume on, and, you know,
Oh, that's the
and
best
then,
feeling. As a costume designer, you know, there's a couple of sort of check boxes or high points that you want to hit, right? You want to walk out of that final sort of design meeting with your director and they're like, you nailed it, right? Like, I love it. It's exactly what I sort of imagined, but better. You know, so you want to check that box. And then, you know, you want to complete your fittings with the actor and have them turn around and look at themselves and really like their posture changes and they sort of get it for the first time. They really get a full three-dimensional, four-dimensional sense of that character, and then you know you've done your job.
so good segue, Claudita. Let's start the presentation to look at some specific examples, and I want to know how Lex went from concept to the actual design. So, dear Claudita, if you can share the screen. There we go. Awesome. All right. So, okay. So, first example is the Confessions of a Cocaine Cowboy.
Right.
Beautiful. All right.
So Michelle, I mean, you and I struggled with this look a little bit, and
Yeah.
I think it's a great jumping off point, only because again we're talking about a character who actually existed in our reality. Um, this is a story based in truth, based in actual events that happened, but it was written in a way and it was presented in a way that immediately made her almost a mythological character, right? And I know that we sort of struggle with, well, you know, it's far more chic, it's a little bit forward for, you know, because you we looked at the research together and stuff, and it's sort of this terrible late 70s glam that, you know, was not done well. And you know, for all the money that this woman, you know, stole and killed for, you would have thought she could have afforded a good stylist. Um, but we wanted to, you know, it goes back to that style element. I knew, you know, after our conversations, the Swaders, Alan, were making big operatic gestures. The palette was really tight, and it was these, you know, sort of grand gestures, almost dreamscapes, each one of these scenes, sharp cuts that made this almost film noir. And so it was really important that all of this amped up. And when we first saw this woman, right, this legend, this myth, that she was a little larger than life and that she embodied all of the sort of mythology that people already were talking about her, you know. And yes, there was a little bit of history, and there was definitely some, you know, there's photos of Griselda Blanco in this halter jumper. She didn't look nearly as good as our actor looked in
Yeah.
it, you know.
Azila for sure.
Yeah, oh, Ziwa looked incredible, and you know, and she was one of these ones that, you know, she had a lot of thoughts on the character, and you know, hair and this and that, and of course she had to go back and forth so many times. And when she put this on, she was like, I feel like a badass. And she's like, I know I don't look exactly like she did, but you know, it was very important that we sort of embody this power, this sexuality, this intimidation, right? This intimidating force, with this woman who is, you know, basically, of course, all in white. Like, she's, you know, it's Cocaine Cowboys, you know, and so when she gets hit with that first shaft of light, she walks out from this dark silhouette that didn't, you know, that was again a myth or the legend of Griselda, and then she walks out in the shaft of light, and it's, you know, more than you could have ever imagined.
And
Um,
that moment there, it's a great collaboration between all designers. Set design, suddenly that gate opens, and then lighting design from behind her is doing some backlight, so you only see her shadow, and then she stepped forward, and boom, we reveal her costume, we reveal her character, and it's a moment that could only work with great collaboration between every discipline.
And really, yes, and really strong choices. I think that, we, when dealing with these sort of historic characters that are a little larger than life and that have this sort of this ethos of legend around them, a mythology around them, you've got to make bold choices, and sort of celebrate that mythology a little bit.
And in the boxes that you need to check, the director like it, the actor feels. Then there's an extra box here in this production, which was that the son of Griselda Blanco, the actual son, was there on
Right.
opening night, and he just went to tears. He just started to sob like a little boy when the actress came
Oh,
out. He said,
I didn't know that.
"Oh yeah, you didn't?
No,
Yes."
I didn't know that.
He went and he hugged Zila, and they both cried for a long time. So I can't believe he did. Did you escape the party for the opening night party? The
Yeah,
opening night
no,
party,
that's
he was
amazing.
yes. So that's another box to check.
Well, and that's the other thing. Obviously, his mother is no longer with us,
Right.
but we often, our minds sort of, they remember what they want to remember. Often it's
Right.
the good stuff, right? It's the positive memory. It's the powerful memories. It's not the bad stuff. And I think that a lot of times that's a sort of a survival thing that our minds do. And my hope would be that he sort of saw this, and while it was a sort of poetic version of his mom, right, that it did sort of remind him of the beautiful moment, like
Right.
the beauty of her, the power that she had, good, bad, or indifferent. But from what you're saying, if we got that kind of emotional response, one would think that he made those connections.
And and of course, both cops were there
Right.
and I mean they couldn't be. They just spent the whole night taking photograph with the car. Well, and here's Yancy Arias being Rivi Ayala again, somebody
Yep.
made famous by the documentary,
Right.
and and I think historically you got exactly correct. Of course, his jail or a version of what he's wearing in jail. But then, you have to build layers on top of that to tell the rest of the story.
Right. And this was written in such a way that it was a memory play, right? So we're jumping back and
Right.
forth from history and different episodes. And again, when I was talking, when we first started our conversations, and we were talking with the Swaders and with Alan and stuff, and we're talking about these big gestures and these shifts between, memory and reality versus what was a memory. And obviously we had the stage picture that we were concerned about, to make sure that people understood, oh, okay, we're back in time now. We have to have
Right.
some indication of what that period was. Um, a clear definition of the new character they're playing. If they're playing a different character, like Zila had to go from, Griselda to DA and all of this stuff.
Right.
And so making those distinctions between characters and speed, you can see here that Zila is actually wearing the same jumpsuit under that jacket, because she
Right.
had, 5-10 seconds to do a wig, jacket change, everything. So on a technical from a technical standpoint, making sure that we could land those changes, and she could do so comfortably. And then with Yancy, we're trying to get the prison jumper the right shade of blue gray, so that was accurate, because that, if anybody's seen the documentary, it's like you're looking
Right.
at that most of the time. And then making very specific, again, bold, but very sort of distinct choices, the wine shirt that he can jump into when he's 10 years prior, when he's telling a backstory or something like that, and making things very, very fast, but also very distinct. So, again, in a best case scenario, usually you have 2 hours that an audience gets to spend with each character. And not only do they get to see the character develop that story, but the clothing gets to help tell that story. With a show like this, sometimes the characters are on stage for 20 seconds, right? And we have to
Right.
create some sort of indelible memory so that the storyline can continue. And so, and because the changes are very simple, it's only one, change a shirt, change, a jacket, something like that. Um, it's really making sure that the color palette of what you're choosing works correctly for the character and is distinct so that there's no confusion. The palette works correctly with what the scenic designers have created, and really the palette works with what the lighting designer is creating. You want to make sure that the choices that you're making for that character, if it's a strong DA character, to make a strong, bold choice that is not going to be washed out in that specific cue, or isn't going to fight, with that. And I remember talking to, you can see Yancy or Rivi on the red chair there. We wanted to color connect that fire engine red chair with her,
Right.
that she was always sort of the fire under his ass.
Right. Right.
So and those were the only two bright red things on stage. And it's a simple choice, but it's really effective.
Extraordinarily effective. And there we go. That's another. So we have here, we have Nick Richburg, who is now the managing director of Miami New Drama. Yes, it's by the way, so I finally have my Bat Cop. That's all Miami New Drama needed, to succeed, was a Bat Cop.
Did he keep his costume?
He had his mustache during almost all of COVID. Then he became a dad a few months ago, or a few weeks ago.
Congrats!
And shaved it, but yeah. So we're talking about two real life character, Singleton and Diaz, Al Singleton and Raul Diaz, who were both there for opening night as well. And of course they also played different characters, right? So Nick played Raul Diaz, and then he played now I don't remember which small character this was.
Multiple characters. I mean, he played multiple quick characters.
And so, but you see, I can tell that's the same pants that he has on throughout, maybe the same white undershirt, and so that's another layer. But it's incredible. I mean, you see those two characters here, they're completely different people, right? They are, you can just tell, although they all have Nick Richburg's face and Nick Richburg's mustache, we're talking about, completely different people.
Well, we were talking about, Nick with, his main character having, I think historically having had that big, beautiful porn stash.
Right.
And how does that translate to the other characters, and I know that he only had, a few minutes on stage with this goon, basically, and making sure that he could make that change and he could comfortably get into the next character, both physically and mentally, right? Because it's a very different character. And oftentimes I think when we ask actors, we'll just make the change, we've got to make it within this 12-second transition or something, we're only looking at it from a technical aspect. Yes, we can rig it, we can do whatever kind of magic tricks we need to do for him to physically make the change. But often actors need that moment to sort of like switch gears into that character. And so, that's also a conversation that always needs to be, and Nick was great about that. He was very clear with what he needed, what he thought was going to work with the character. And again, you can see that the choices were actually very simple, but they need to be strategic, right? So something that is a completely a departure from that taupe blazer. Okay, so we're going to go denim in this, we're going to accessorize it a certain way, And then, of course, his body language and his approach to character, you know, wraps the whole thing up in a pretty bow.
Right. And okay, so great. So we have here Brian Blanco, the kid who also played a couple characters
Sorry, I just had a PTSD flashback seeing this kid. Not because the kid wasn't wonderful and lovely, just because, oh my God, shaving his head.
Well, that's so funny. We had, yes, that. Oh, and thank God that that didn't happen.
Oh my God.
Billy Corben, the director of the documentary and the writer with Oren Squire of the show, really wanted to shave Brian Blanco's head during the electric chair
Live
scene.
during the, you know, each performance. And you know, I will hand it to you, Michelle, again, you know, playing chief diplomat here. I think as a director, you know, I was able to speak to you as director, and you sort of saw my point was, you know, we could do this every night. It's going to require this, and this, right? It's totally doable. It's very expensive.
Very expensive.
And then so we were saying like, okay, well, you know, what are sort of the halfway points that we could meet? Like, is he clipping his hair? And if that's the case, then would the actor actually do that? So you went to bat and talked to his mom, who's lovely, about the whole thing. And then of course, you know, artistic director Michelle is like trying to give everybody what they want. Like, but knowing that it was technically an impossibility,
an
right?
impossibility, yes. But it's interesting because you know, because Billy is a filmmaker and he thinks he's a freaking brilliant filmmaker, and I hope everybody can see
It's a great documentary. Yeah.
Screwball, his last documentary, Screwball, is, you know, was the talk of town last year, etc. But he thinks in images, in cinematic images that sometimes you know might not translate to theater. So we have to come up with a theatrical. And I think you framed it that way, Lex. You said, yes, that's a great image. Now, what can theater do to do an image almost as powerful as that, or more powerful?
Right. How do we get the theatricality out of that without creating that literal image? Which, you know, I will say, had we done that, right? Had we gotten a grant from Barbizon or something, you know, for $2.5 million for new wigs every night, it would have been incredibly powerful. It would have been incredibly shocking. But I think there's a careful line you need to walk, right? And I think that it's often the answers aren't always clear, which is, you know, you can lean into that absolute dramatic moment and put all your ducks in, you know, put all your eggs in that basket. And is it worth it? Maybe. But at the same time, can you get that same dramatic effect? Can you get that same visceral response in a different way, where you're using tried and true theatrical tools to give a live experience that is different than, but just as powerful? And, you know, in some ways you sort of equate it to nudity, right? Like, sometimes it's an incredibly powerful choice if it's meaningful, if it's thoughtful and thought-provoking, to have somebody nude on stage. But if it's just nakedness for naked's sake, you can achieve that. Often you can achieve that, I think, with a different approach.
And you know what happens with me with nudity is that the moment I see a naked person on stage, I go like, oh, are they getting paid more for it? You know, like I become an active. The storytelling just goes away, and I'm reminded that I'm seeing actors, and then I'm, you know. So for me,
all I can think of is, you know, like, I hope that merkin is on real tight. So yeah, it can often be distracting, and often I think, you know, we as designers and creatives have to think about the big picture as well. Like, yes, that would be a very powerful moment, but is that within the same theatrical vocabulary as the rest of the show? And is it going to be distracting? And I think in this instance, it would have been distracting. People would have
I
just thought
agree.
like, A, how did they do that?
Right.
Did they really do that? And that moment is so fast that, you know, you need people to sort of stay with you in terms of the pace of storytelling. And
Right.
we couldn't really afford to lose somebody to be like, gosh, how'd they do that every night?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we have in. I thought we had One Night in Miami before. Do we not have? Okay. So we're doing now In Love and Warcraft. That's at Alliance Theater.
Okay, so
All
this is
right.
obviously a very different show, directed by my dear friend Laura Kepley, who is the artistic director at Cleveland Playhouse. And this was actually the first show we worked on. And one of the reasons why I thought this would be a fun one to talk about is, you know, we went from doing Confessions of a Cocaine Cowboy, which is historical characters based on a documentary, very, very real, told in a very theatrical way, right? Super fun. Switching gears, this is the story of In Love and Warcraft is it's this woman who in Southern California sort of lives two different lives. Like she lives her real life in reality where she's very shy and sort of feels very powerless, introverted. And then when she lives in her gaming world, I mean, she's this incredibly powerful,
Hmm.
like Princess Azareth character, larger than life. And so we had to go back between like hyper reality, right? Like college students in Southern California to these larger than life characters on stage that lit up. I mean, the girl, Alexandra, who plays this shaman character here. You know, I think she's all of like 5'2", and you know, and she plays the main character's best friend. She also plays this larger than life character, and so I think by the time it was all said and done, we had her at like 5'10", just under 6 feet. So like the idea of, you know, not only are we trying to create the characters, but we have to create these sort of transformative bodies. And most people, you know, couldn't even tell that it was the same actor. So a lot of fun, a lot of technicality, obviously, going into these with the you know, costumes that light up and allow them to sort of change body shape and size. But lots of fun.
So you designed two worlds. You designed the world in which the character offline takes place, and then the online world.
That's right. So the offline, you know, was Southern California college campus,
Right.
you know, young adults, you know, going through their daily lives. And then there was this online world that they shifted into these characters. And, you know, this guy, I mean, he ended up topping out, I can't remember exactly how tall he was, but, you know, I think we got him close to like 9 feet tall when it was
Oh
all
my
said and done.
God.
And you know, and so this is the main
That's
character,
beautiful. Wow.
her sort of Princess Azareth look. But you know, she goes from being this sort of bookish, introverted girl to being this incredibly powerful, you know, badass um, avatar. And again, this was one of those ones where you work with that actor to make sure, okay, like, A, are you comfortable in this? Because
Right.
it's a huge departure from being your, you know, covered up and playing that other character, and then whoa, now we're exposing all this skin. You know, and the heights and everything, and working with her, and you know, I will say, and this for all the ladies out there, it is impossible to find a thigh-high boot with a wedge heel, because nobody wants to wear a thigh-high boot with a wedge heel. That's like the combination of like practicality and also like just for looks, right? And so we had to build this shoe so she could do all the choreography
Oh my
um,
God.
with the height. And so, you know, all sorts of little technical challenges with a show like this, but ultimately a lot of fun.
Amazing. Candide, I think that's my favorite musical of all times.
I mean, that overture is just,
Ba-da-ba-ba,
yeah,
ba-da-ba-da-ba-bum.
yeah,
It's
it's so
just
good. So this was Susan Booth, the artistic director of the Alliance, directed this, and this was in collaboration with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, which was just
Amazing.
you know, there was this moment, and you know, it doesn't matter, and I mean, you could probably attest to this too, Michelle, because you're, and I think this is one of the things I love about you is that, you know, you're in a position where, you know, you're senior administrative staff, but you're also like very humble. There's a humility about you, which I think makes people really drawn to you. And I think as any creative, you never lose that little sense of, you know, like being starstruck or humility. And there was a moment where, so this is Robert Spano, the maestro of the Atlantic Symphony Orchestra, you know, Grammy Award winning orchestra. And I get to dress him, right? And I've been a fan of his for years. He doesn't know me from Adam. And the you know, the conceit, the concept of all of this is there was a puppet master who is this fella in the middle here, who's this mad scientist guy. And he creates the narrator, and then he creates the maestro. And these two, you know, individuals are sort of his sort of painted puppet, you know, brain children. And of course, because we have the whole Atlanta Symphony Orchestra on stage and a choir of like 200 people, they all had to be dressed. And
the orchestra has to be dressed. You're kidding me.
Correct. And so,
oh my God,
there's like a wonderful like orchestra director who's not the musical director, not the conductor, but he sort of manages, you know, these are the like fixed type of uniforms, outfits that the symphony plays in. And of course, I had this very specific sort of like black and white, but I didn't want it to be just like tuxedos and all this stuff. And so I had made this request that they sort of combined a couple of their different official looks or whatever. And it had to go through all of these channels to get approved. And the whole symphony had to agree on everything. And there we were going into the first rehearsal during tech, and I'm standing, you know, in the backstage basement of the symphony, and I'm watching the entire orchestra file through, and you know, every member, again, they don't know who the hell I am, and they're wearing exactly what I've asked them to wear, and it's like, and it's just like you could not feel more like excited and like small and big at the same time, you know. But it's those little moments that I just love. It's like they don't even know who I am, but they're doing exactly what I asked them to do. And so like that was really special. Of course, we have Aaron Blake, who played Candide. And again, everything had this very textural, very painterly aspect to the costume because they were all supposed to be these puppeteers sort of creations, right? And so Kunigunda, you know, she has to undress in this dress and then redress in this dress on stage. So a lot of sort of technical elements in that one as well. But Alexandra Shoney, who played Kunigunda, just a obviously phenomenal voice, but also just a wonderful human who was just up for anything. And I will say that, you know, I won't name names at all because you always think going into an opera or operetta, and I've been fortunate enough to do a couple of them. You always think that the principal female, right, is going to be a total diva. And while we definitely had a diva on this show, or a divo, she was not it. And it was like the most wonderful surprise. I mean, could not be more down to earth, could not be more game for anything. She's, you know, throwing clothes off, climbing on top of benches and, you know, 3.5-inch heels, hitting high A's, and then like doing it again and again and again and again. And Susan's like, can you do that while you're taking the clothes off? And she's like, sure, we'll try this. I mean, she was just a dream. One of those performers that you know you just have the fondest memories of.
Because that's the other layer, right? I mean, the performers have to be your ally because they, you know, they can also get, you know, they can also get in the way of a good costume. So
Oh,
sometimes,
absolutely. And, Christopher Sieber here, who plays our narrator, I mean, everybody knows who Christopher Sieber is. He's Broadway royalty.
right,
Could not be easier, more lovely, more game for anything. Just an utter delight, and obviously a total pro. And so, you can't make assumptions because I'm always, 99% of the time I'm pleasantly surprised by just what great allies the performers are. And again, I think that goes, both ways. Like, as long as, there has to be mutual trust.
right. That's right.
And every first fitting that I ever do, I want to have a conversation with that actor and say, here's my plan for you. Like Michelle, this is what I'm thinking of putting you in, right? Like, talk to me. Does that feel like something that you'd see yourself in? Does that feel like it's appropriate for your character? And oftentimes, actors will say, oh, it's whatever your vision is. And I'll say, well, but it also has to feel right for you. And it opens that up, I think, in a way that some actors aren't used to experiencing, and some actors, I think, are very vocal about their thoughts and feelings about character, which is great.
Right.
And it allows you to have a dialogue that a dynamic that establishes that kind of trust that I think is really important. Because when it comes to tech, I can go to Chris and say, hey, do you mind trying it this way?
Right.
Or like, try wearing it this way. Oh, sure, like, no problem. But I think, because at the end of the day, I don't have to do what they have to do. I don't have
Right.
to put those clothes on. I don't have to perform those lines. And so my job is to give them the tools that can best let them do the job they need to do.
And they're under a ton of stress. So
Absolutely.
sometimes it's the worst moment. You want something out of them, and they on a normal circumstances they would not have a problem with it, but
Right.
during tech or just the level of stress is so high that people really sometimes don't respond in the most collaborative way because as you said it, the whole weight is on them and them alone at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we all go home. We don't have to be there every
Right.
night.
We
They do.
we get to walk away, and they have
Right.
to keep continuing to perform. And like you're
Right.
saying in tech, I think it's really important for anybody who's watching this who hasn't experienced tech. Um, yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with tech. And I think most creatives do. I know a lot of my colleagues love tech, and understandably so. That's where their work gets to shine. Particularly like lighting designers, sound designers, those designers who, you can't put the sketches up on the board and you can't like
Right.
look at the model. And it's really, really important. What we ask actors to do during tech is
Inhumane.
is insane sometimes, particularly like a show like Candide, right? Where they are singing their asses off and doing it again and again and again so that we can light them properly, or we can, create the right sound cue, or we can time the quick change, specifically, because if they don't do it in show standard and show conditions,
Right.
then we can't time things out appropriately. And so, sometimes they'll protect their voice, understandably, and they won't sing full out, whatever. But they're on their feet, not like this whole time, hitting their mark. Do the number, do it again. Can you hold that? Okay, hold. Don't move. Don't. It's a very, very long process, and it's very taxing. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is as a performer to just be told, stand here, do this, do it
Right.
again, go back, And so I have mad respect for performers, and particularly those who just patiently and graciously get through it each time. It's amazing.
And that you tech typically is 12-hour period where you get a
Oh,
2-hour break. So day after day, those actors have to come in, at
and I can get a
even
drink during my dinner break.
exactly they can.
They
Yes.
can.
So
I can see how
it's
many gin and sodas I can fit into, my 2-hour break.
okay. So Claudita, concerned with time,
Oh, okay. Should we?
Baskerville. All right. So
Oh,
no. So this
we
is
can
just so
fly
tell us
through
about this.
this.
Okay.
Such a fun show. There's 5 actors in this. They play, I want to say, close to 50 characters. There are more than 78 quick changes in this show. The
Wow.
director, Brendan Fox, was very specific. He's like, I don't want it to be like a 39-step situation where like a hat changes the character. He wanted full top to tail changes
Wow.
for every character throughout. And he really, you know, we're talking about storytelling. He's like, we only have a small amount of time, but I need people to invest in every single one of these characters. And he was right, because each character was so important to get to the end of that mystery, right? Each character was really played a
Hmm.
key part, but sometimes you only get a minute with them. And some of these changes were like 12, 15 seconds. So a lot of engineering. This is the one show that I've ever worked on that the entire wardrobe crew got a curtain call every night. Um, and that was a
That's
choice
awesome.
that Brendan made, and I was all for it, because they, without those 4 humans running like mad backstage tracking costumes, because a change might happen stage left and then it's got to happen again on stage right. You know, all of those things every single night was just incredible, and you know, I can't imagine what it would have been like with, you know, without a fantastic professional wardrobe crew.
That's the other thing. Those are the unsung heroes. We just had this very big musical, Wonderful World, with so many changes and so many.
I
And
just
it.
had a lovely afternoon with Ricky Tripp the other day.
Oh, I love Ricky.
Yeah,
What a guy.
yeah,
And
what a
he.
talent. Yeah.
And I think that his career is going places, and he was just so what he created. Some of those movements were so dynamic. I'd never seen anything like
Oh
it.
yeah, that boy can dance and
Oh my
choreograph.
God. Yes,
Sure.
yes. And but the people behind the stage, to the wardrobe crew, who had to deal with everyone, including everyone's mood and everyone's. I
Yeah.
mean, that is like really the front line. That's
Oh,
like the front, like that's where it's at,
just fighting for space on stage to do a quick change is like, you know, and you're doing it with a headlamp or a flashlight in your mouth,
Right.
and you know, you're half blind, and you're, you know, it's crazy. You're absolutely right. They are absolutely the unsung heroes.
Yeah. So you know what? That's a great idea. We'll give them a curtain call on our next show. I think that's a beautiful idea. Okay, so we were at One Night in Miami, the great
One night
Carl
in Miami.
Caulfield
Let's talk about it.
director, Ken Powers. All right, so you have here Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X.
Well, and this is, you know, this is one of these, uh, you know, beautiful stories that's sort of based in history and has historical characters, you
That's
know,
right.
but is infused with just enough fiction, you know. So uh, we had to establish these characters. You know, so they're all on stage at the same time. So you know, one thing that we haven't really touched on, but I think is really important here, is um, getting the historical context correct with those clothes, the period correct. You know, cuts of suits, cuts of pants, material. You can see that beautiful herringbone polyester pants on Kieran. Um, you know, and you know, making sure that all of those things sort of tell the story of the time period and the characters, but then also dramatize it in a certain way where, okay, there's no confusion as to which character is who. So,
That's
you
right.
know, make sure that, you know, Kieran's palette is a certain way. We're going to make sure that, you know, Malcolm X's, you know, palette is very tight and very specific to, you know, historical accuracy. We're going to look at Sam Cooke and know that his character is a little flashier and playing with patterns and taking, you know, specificity from historical research and stuff. And of course, Jim Brown, Esau. I love Esau. Um,
Ether is I mean,
uh,
he was going to do a Wonderful World, and then got a big TV role and had
uh,
to pull out a few. And that guy is just, I
he's
mean, how no,
again
that's.
one of the performers that, you know, I hold dear, and you know,
But,
we've worked together a
but
few times now.
but I mean, but we had a lot of issues with him because I mean, I don't know if this picture, you know, makes justice, but that man is a statue. He's
He's
so
huge.
tall. He's huge, and there's
He is
no
huge.
clothes. There's no, you know, there's no. Yeah, here's a better picture that
Yeah.
really shows
So down
his
on the right
scale.
here,
I mean,
yeah.
getting
So
shoes for him because you normally buy a ton of shoes and then return whatever we don't need, or but you know, but finding shoes that are like 52 or whatever size Esau
yeah,
is.
I mean, the size 15 is a big shoe. You know, and not only, but here's the thing, right? With Esau, he is uh, not only a so oftentimes we'll dress bigger humans, and I love all body shapes. I think it makes for a great stage picture when you have a variable sizes. Um, with Esau, he is like this statuesque like sculpture of a man. So he's not, so in this country, right, if we have tall clothes, they are proportionately as big. So we
Right,
have big and tall. Esau's literally just tall, and he is like a chiseled statue, right?
right, right,
So not only are you ordering very specific sizes and clothes for him, everything has to be tailored down,
right,
because he's just, he doesn't actually fill the clothes sideways. He just fills them. He's a robust human.
right.
Um, so that with the shoes, and also Esau is bald, you know,
That's
uh,
right.
and wigs are tricky and very expensive. And,
Very expensive.
we
We
were
found out the
very,
hard way. Yes.
very fortunate that in this particular instance that he had played the role before.
Right.
And Jim Brown has had a very specific look, again going back to that sort of period accuracy. So we really got lucky on that one.
Yep. Yep.
But this was a lot of fun to do, and you can tell, like, taking a cue from the Swader Boys' set, and again the historical research and stuff, but then upping it up a notch and like having fun with it,
Yep.
is it's really important just to tell that poetry of the story.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so what a wonderful presentation. I think this is a great moment because I know you have a hard exit at 12:30
I do.
to open it up for questions. So the way we're going to do this is either the participants can either raise their digital hand and we can bring them up, or in the Q&A section, just type in your questions
Okay,
for Lex.
so I'm opening this Q&A window right now, right?
Yep. So there are no
Okay.
questions yet in the
Oh,
in the
great.
Q&A. People are, I assume, now at this moment typing, or you can just in the participant window just raise your hand. That's the other way to do it. So let us know, and we'll probably the questions will start sooner
In
than
the
later.
meantime, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Michelle, what is your hair care regimen these days? I have such hair jealousy.
Well, I just shampoo and conditioner. There's nothing else
Just
to
good
it.
genes. Good genes.
Yeah. Well, listen, I don't have a lot going on, but my hair definitely is I take pride of my mane,
Yeah.
um, and uh, and I love it. A friend of mine just had hair implants from the
Oh
back to the
gosh.
front, and I felt like I should probably have been a donor. I could have helped in that regard. But I mean,
No, no, no.
listen, hair. But I always say that the other way is that God made a few perfect heads. The rest He gave hair.
There you
So
go.
my bald friends. It's funny. Like all my bald friends are like amazing heads. I think.
Oh,
You know what I
we've
mean?
got a question.
All right.
And I happen to know the asker. Hi, Yvonne. I can't see you, but I can read your question. Yvonne is a fabulous scenic and costume designer based in Texas, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you find it creating the world scenically versus creating characters through costumes? And believe it or not, this is a question that I get asked a lot.
Great
Um,
question.
and I, you know, oddly, and I think this is just by nature, when I'm reading a script for the first time and sort of getting a sense of that world, when I'm doing scenery, I often wonder about the characters, and what that story is, and what sort of motifs or concepts or underlying sort of um, tenets are being dealt with the characters, and how that manifests in a visual way, and how that can be represented in the world. And conversely, if I'm designing costumes, I often think about what the space is that they're inhabiting and how that affects, you know, them as characters, the choices of what they're wearing. Does it make sense in the space, or does it make sense that it's antithetical to the space? So it kind of goes back and forth, but I definitely, you know, I prefer to do scenery and costumes together because it's a conversation that I can continue to have. But of course, I love collaborating with, fabulous colleagues that you can have that conversation with that person.
I have a question for you. When you go through the world, you live in, in dynamic New York. Um, how often are you paying attention to what people, what, people in the street are wearing?
Nonstop, nonstop. And
Yeah, I thought
actually,
as much.
I have a. Yeah, I always thought, oh God, I don't want to send this energy into the universe, but like, if I had to pick somebody out of a lineup, or I witnessed a crime, or like
Wow.
had to help with a police composite,
You would be the.
I would nail it. And I've just, I've always been, and it's a fine line between like just being observant and being aware, and hyper aware to the point that sometimes it's annoying, actually, that like I wish I wasn't so focused on everything, because it's a lot of information to sort of process. um, it's a fine line between being very observant and being judgmental, right?
Right,
So
right.
like, I can say, oh, like, that guy should not be wearing that jacket. And like that, but then I'll be like, why shouldn't he wear that jacket, Lex? And I was like, well, okay. Well, because, it's not tailored properly, or, et cetera, et cetera. So I tend to be very, very observant.
Yeah, no, I bet you were. So we have a great question from Barbara Bradshaw, who's a wonderful actress here in South Florida. She
Wow.
said, I tuned in late, so forgive me if you already answered this or addressed this. How involved are you in the hair wig design of a character?
That's a great question. And I think really, really important for both performers and production personnel to understand. I always equate wigs to costumes like props to scenery, right?
That's wow, that's a great way to.
So like, the finishing touches on a character's look are the hair and makeup, and like the accessories, and that final sort of cherry on top, right? And just like with the development of any costume design, character design, you have to think about that hair and get somewhere in the ballpark, or at least understand, um, what that rough style is going to be. If you are in a situation where you're using the actor's hair, you have to be very, very attentive to what the actor's needs are to protect their hair. If they're doing some sort of style every night, you have to be very conscious of that, and be very empathetic to what they're having to go through. I prefer to use wigs just because it takes that out of the equation. And if it's a good wig, most actors have no issue, wearing them. If it's not a great wig, it really does become this sort of helmet that is very difficult to act through, I think. But I work very closely with a couple of different wig designers, and it's a conversation. They have to have approach to that character. They have to have a conversation with that actor. It also is something that's very personal, right? So you have to make sure that not only does the wig and hairstyle fit the character, but it also has to make the actor look as good as possible, or like present the actor in a way that's appropriate for that character. So skin tone, hair color, all of those things have to be taken into consideration when designing the hair and wig. But I tend to be very, very involved with wig and hair design.
And I remember Cocaine Cowboy, something particular happened. I don't know if I think it was already during the run, which was that Andy's mustache in the nightclub scene, fell off, and and the and it just kind of became this beautiful moment. Because in the way, because the show was constantly addressing the audience is in, it was never, it's not a fourth wall production where you're always, incorporated with the audience. So when that happens, the audience was so committed, and so he just looked at the audience, and it was just
And
a
it's
beautiful
Andy.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
You
Andy's a
can't not love
genius at that.
Andy. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So okay,
What is it? Ooh.
Janice,
Oh, hi, Janice. I also know Janice.
you're
Um,
so popular.
Janice is
She's asking.
another fabulous costume designer who I've worked with actually. She assisted me on this crazy project called Public Works in Dallas, and like hundreds of people from like all walks of life that all had to get a costume. And yeah, Janice was one of my incredible assistants who helped pull that off. So a dream project. Um, Gosh, I don't really have a dream project. Um, I find that every project that I look back on is worthwhile for some reason or another. I mean, Janice, working with you on Public Works was a dream project, just in the sense that it was an experience I'd never have. I look back on with huge fondness, and just the type of work that we were able to do for the community like made it pretty dreamy. And while we were in the thick of it, doing 12, 15, 20 fittings a day, and just like putting looks together that sort of fit these different aesthetics and different concepts for these groups. While we're in the thick of it, you don't really think of the type of work that you're doing. But then when you look back and say, wow, like these people got this incredible experience that they never would have had otherwise. You had a part in that. Like, that's pretty dreamy. I think, as far as like a personal dream project, I don't know, something that allows me to retire.
Let's get you to Broadway.
Yeah,
Let's get
yeah,
you to
yeah.
Broadway.
That's something that pays good royalties.
Right.
Something that I can hire you on.
Yeah. So Johnny's also asking, what has been the best mistake you've made as a designer that has informed your approach to design?
I think that's a fantastic question. I
Isn't
think
it? Yeah.
it is, and I think the best mistake, and there have been many. I think the best series of mistakes, and it was when I came out of school. And unfortunately, when you're in school in undergrad, and I hope it's not this way anymore, but when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was in school, there was this big sort of disparity between those who performed and those who were tech or crew, right?
Hmm.
And there's this culture of technical creative artists who basically would talk about actors and performers as like meat puppets, basically, that they were, like, oh, they're just actors. And it sort of, I guess, subconsciously sort of gets ingrained into your mind. Like, I never consciously felt that way, but I think at a certain point, like, that culture sort of sunk in a little bit. So when I first came out of school and I was working on a couple of off Broadway projects, and then this regional company in Maine, there was a better than you, a little like hoity attitude that I had about like, well, this is the design and you have to wear it because I'm the costume designer. And boy, it was real quick. I think that attitude shifted over the first like 2 or 3 productions I designed professionally out of school, because I just realized like, I don't really think that's antithetical to the way I like to work. Where did I get that attitude in the first place? And I could be like, oh yeah, well, in school they were just like, oh, the actors, like, oh, the crew. And it was just this big hunk of humble pie that I continue to eat on every production, where it's like, nope, you can't do the job that they're doing. And and my work as a designer has just gotten better the more I sort of open myself up to input and critique from the person who's needing to actually bring life to the character I'm designing. So I think that's probably the best mistake I ever made.
We have another question, which is, the shows that you've worked on have played in played in foreign countries, and how do you feel about the cultural perception on shows from people with other cultural backgrounds?
So hey MUI Patrick. I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of productions I've worked on here move. So there was one production that I took to Germany, and one production that we took to Canada. So exotic, I know. And I don't think I can appropriately answer that because there wasn't sort of a script or dramaturgical sort of baseline, because the productions I designed and took internationally were dance productions. They were contemporary dance productions. And so what's so beautiful about that is there are very different cultural perceptions, but there are also individual perceptions in our own, American culture. And that's the beautiful thing about a contemporary or abstract piece, is you sort of get out of it what you want out of it. And so, I will say that we were welcomed with open arms, and people were very, very generous overseas. And I made a lot of good friends who are still friends today.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an interesting.
Christopher Sheely.
Yeah. So okay. So Christopher is asking, how do you successfully continue to?
Christopher, I will say, is a dear friend who is both the director of production and resident scenic designer in Colorado, at the Fine Arts Center in Colorado Springs, and he and I have worked together for a while now, and he's a gem. So what are you asking? How do you successfully continue to tap your juices so you can handle multiple shows and the deadlines all at once? You have a consistent standard processing. I do have a consistent standard I rely on. And as my director of production on multiple shows, I think Chris has experienced this on the other side. So at any given time, we as freelance designers are juggling multiple projects. And often, and so I have this sort of rule, right, where if you're double booked or triple booked and you can't actually focus your attention on the project that you need to work on at that time, then you shouldn't take it. So like, yes, if you're teching for a show, I mean, can you work on another production? Sure, if they're not needed, but your priority is the show that you're teching, right? So I've certainly sketched or researched during tech, but your main priority is being in that show. And so my calendar is color coded, and I actually have like those staples flags on contracts that have the date, like that have tech dates or due dates flagging them. And all of those dates are in my calendar as well. And so like if we've got, like, let's say production A, the deadlines are coming up, but then there are production meetings for production B, C, or D that are trying to get solved within the week. I will generally limit 1 or 2 days a week to potential production meetings prior to deadlines on a different project. So I'll have like Mondays and Tuesdays are open, I'll keep open for productions B, C, and D if we need to talk or have a conversation, whatever. But the rest of the week is off limits because the priority is production A. And I've told directors and directors of production often, be like, got your email, thank you very much. I'm not focused on this project this week, but I'll get back to you as soon as, and just be completely candid, right? Like, we all have to take on multiple projects, but you literally can't work on all of them at the same time. So prioritizing and being really strict about that is really important to me. There are some days where, like, if you do, a poll or whatever online and like everybody can meet on Wednesday and you're the only one who can't, well then, yeah, you make exceptions for that. But otherwise, like, I tend to be pretty strict with the schedule.
I mean, people maybe don't understand how crazy the life of a designer is because actors also travel from place to place, but then then they sit down, rehearse, the opening night, and they just perform for a month or month and a half, and they're there. But you guys, in order to make your living, in any given month, you do like 2 or 3 tech, which is like 10 days, processes of
Oh
at
yeah.
least 10 days. And so you go from city A to city B to city C. Like, how often are you at home?
Very rarely, and careful what you wish for, because man, up to March 13th, I think I'd been on the road for 4 weeks straight at that point, and I was like, I wish I could just stay home for a while. And then, I was about to get in a cab to go. I was in Minneapolis at the Guthrie, and I was about to go back to Louisville to work on Humana. And my assistant Lisa like runs over to me, and we're in the shop and I'm getting ready to leave, and she's like, okay, so yeah, Louisville just called and you need to get on the phone with them right now because they're flying you back to New York. And I've been still ever since. What is that, like 6 months ago now? So careful what you wish for, but it's been great. It's been great. James is
James.
asking,
Mhm.
are there certain fabrics and or materials that you especially enjoy working with, and why? Hey, James. So
Great
with
question.
regard to costume design, I am a fabric snob. I think, um, different shows require different things. And so, obviously they have to be appropriate to the story you're trying to tell or the production you're working on. Different productions have different budgets, different shops, resources, etc. Um, if we're building clothes, I'm a fabric snob only because um, the drape, the hand, the tailoring, all of the things that have to happen to a costume, in order to get the right period look, let's say we're doing a period show, you've got to make sure that those fabrics actually have that sort of same luster and hand as the actual garments you're trying to sort of replicate, or that flavor you're trying to replicate. And that means like real materials, like not polys. And on the flip side, we work regionally all the time, and sometimes you're doing something at the last second, and there isn't a nice silk store, and so you've got to make do with whatever's available at Joann's or Michael's or whatever. So, but if I had my choice, any array of silks, from chiffons to damask to taffetas. I love really really nice fabrics, particularly if they're in the hands of somebody who really knows how to work with them. I mean, that's just a dream. But I will say this, with regard to theater, costumes also have to last 8 shows a week or multiple shows a week.
Yes, yes.
So because of that, it's often not prudent to use the most beautiful fine silk chiffon in a dress, and sometimes it's smarter to use the poly replica. You can't really tell from stage, um, and they tend to be a little beefier and last a little longer. And so you're doing your wardrobe crew a nice service by not having them mending tears all the time. So it really depends on the project.
Well, listen, you're almost going to turn into a pumpkin in a few minutes from now. I just want to thank you so much for
Thank you,
this.
Michelle, for
You
having me.
listen, no, but you're so passionate about theater, about storytelling, about costume, about sets that it just you leave a class like this really excited, and I can't wait to get back to work, and I can't wait to
Same.
have to fight with your other projects to get you back to Miami.
Oh,
And
that it would be great to see you in Miami and have a long overdue cocktail. We'll get some ice
Yeah,
cream from the corner, and
that's right.
we'll catch
Well,
up.
listen, I don't want to, like, if all of those stores survive, which is, the other thing that we,
Yeah,
which is a new reality, and let's see what the world looks like at the other end of this. Meanwhile, I urge everybody to put on their masks. That's the
absolutely.
only way we're gonna get rid of this, is to responsibly,
Please wear
wear.
your mask. Look out for each other. If you have, I've been posting this artistic director series just to keep awareness to the general public that theaters and those of us who work in the arts and depend on the arts for our livelihood are really suffering right now. Obviously, things are in deadlock right now in Congress. And, but I do know that there are some folks who are fortunate enough to continue working from home, or are still working outside. And if you can, please donate to your favorite theatrical institution, to any sort of arts program, Miami New Drama. There's a link to text there. Seriously, every little bit helps. If everything that you see and love on stage has to be paid for. I think that that's something that people often forget. Like, everything to get it from page to stage is an expense. And so every little thing counts. And so, in any way you can, please support artists and the arts.
Well, with those final words, we thank you from the bottom of our heart, Lex, for coming today. And everybody who participated, this class will live forever in our archives. It'll be a YouTube link in the next day or so. So, if you enjoy this and want to share with somebody, feel free to share it in our archives at colony.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Big love to you and everybody at Miami New Drama. And
yes.
Hopefully I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Take care.